a distinguished expert in the field of genetic epidemiology and a pioneer in gut health research.
In the past, we thought it was all metabolism and things, but increasingly, most of the genes, for example, in obesity are all in the brain.
Our discussion today takes a different slant, though. We dig into the intriguing world of the gut microbiome.
They are absolutely crucial, and we know that we can't function without them.
Tim shares how it influences our overall well-being, including our mood, weight, and potentially our longevity.
The big differences we see in our gut microbes are reflecting the big differences in our food. That means big differences in our chemicals and big differences in our health.
From the impact of diet on our gut health, to the interconnection between our immune system and gut biome, to practical diet tips for health and performance, it's all in this enlightening conversation with Professor Tim Spector. Let's dive in. Dr. Tim Spector, welcome to the Roadman Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I am excited to have you. My background is in academia as well, and my friends and myself, I stuck quite narrowly for a long time into sports law. And a lot of academics do this, where we stick into a very narrow lane. But that isn't your story. Your skill set is much broader. What was your motivation for this approach? Did you feel like you had to go wider to allow yourself to go deeper solving these problems?
Well, it's evolved rather than it was a brilliant idea that I had when I was 21 on how to have a successful career. So actually, it was probably the opposite. I felt only really in control in my early career when I went deep into a very narrow area. And in medical school, I said, well, I couldn't compete with all these brainy, swotty kids who were learning everything in the textbook. So I had to try and get a super specialty and do that. And so I was super lazy, and it was only got into it really the last year of like medical school, and said, oh, how am I going to progress and get the best jobs and not get stuck out in the sticks and forgotten. So I said, I've got to win a prize, and so that was the idea. I'd focus on one area, and it was neurology, and I was going to win the neurology prize, and that was my goal. So it was very narrow of what's really happening what's happening in the neurology in the early 1980s. And I found I really liked being an expert in a tiny field. It sort of suited me, and I researched about it and whatever. So a lot of my early career was finding these niches that no one else was doing and being an expert in it. And that's how I got, self-confidence and esteem, and built up academic papers and et cetera, et cetera. So it was always trying to find something new to move into that started off pretty narrow and obscure, and then broadened out from there. And that's sort of what I've done. But I tended to get bored of it. At one stage, I was the world expert on bony spurs of the knee because I ended up becoming a rheumatologist, and it was quite interesting at epidemiology level. But I'd worked out these atlases of scoring X-rays and looking at these things called osteophytes that come out that around the kneecap and on the knee joint. And I used to go to conferences being asked all over the world to talk about this, and it very quickly became so boring because it really didn't move. Hasn't changed since I left the field either, about 25 years ago. And so then I became a sort of serial specialist.
It's an interesting way to approach medicine, because even the way medicine is set up, it's set up into these silos where you say, like, you're a specialist in rheumatology, somebody else is a specialist in immunity. But my mom, who suffers from rheumatoid arthritis, there's such a crossover between immunity and rheumatoid arthritis that to study each of these things in a vacuum or a silo seems to do a disservice to the broader concern of what we're trying to do is be healthy. You can't have one in isolation.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The system is set up completely wrong, and it's very hard to change because there's lots of vested interests in keeping these specialties unique and separate, and allowing each person to be an elite person in that subspecialty. And so there's very few people like myself who have changed from internal medicine to rheumatology to genetics to epidemiology to nutrition to gut health. They virtually don't exist. And yet we do need people with this breadth to try and get things over. Everything in medicine is conspiring against multidisciplinary work. Everyone says they like it, but there have actually been studies showing that people that do multidisciplinary work get less grants, get less papers, get less acclaim. But when they do finally get a result, it has 10 times more impact than the minor one. So, there have been books written about this, that the general approach is what everyone says should be needed, but the route to get there is very much harder and very discouraging for many people. It's much easier to stay in your silo, your comfort zone. You'll continue to get recognition, you'll be the top of your game, etc., etc. But it's not what society needs, and it's not what's good for science or medicine either.
I've listened to you speaking quite eloquently about gut microbiome recently on a number of high-profile podcasts. Can you explain how our gut health influences far-reaching aspects of ourselves, like our overall well-being, our mood, our weight, and perhaps even our longevity?
Yeah, well, it affects everything, really. We've evolved with them, so it's very hard to imagine us without microbes. And we evolved from them because life started as microbes. And actually, you could say that microbes have created humans so they can live inside them. And they'll, once humans die off, they'll find someone else to live inside of. And I think we've got to see them as essentially chemical factories. They're little pharmacies or pharmaceutical companies, if you like, but there are trillions of them and thousands of species. We're all unique, and we feed them food, and they pump out these chemicals, which are pretty unique. And they produce vitamins, they produce immune-regulating chemicals, appetite suppressants, metabolites for breaking down our food, but brain chemicals for keeping us happy or stopping us getting anxious or nervous. So, we can't function without them, and they are absolutely crucial. And we know that the big differences we see in our gut microbes are reflecting the big differences in our food. That means big differences in our chemicals and big differences in our health. So people with poor gut health, poor gut microbes, a really paltry supply of these chemicals, have twice the risk of nearly all the diseases of the Western world. And I think a lot of our problem with diet can be explained by the microbes and how they then interact with our bodies.
So to really simplify this for listeners, like gut microbiomes, we're taking these in as a part of a healthy, balanced diet. And, so help me kind of understand them, I suppose, what I'm trying to say. Like, different microbes are coming from different foods, or is there a set number of microbes? I think we find it much easier, at least I do, in conversations to understand protein and the various forms of branched chain amino acids. Then I don't have a conceptual understanding of what a gut microbe is.
Right. Well, we're born sterile. So the first thing is we acquire them. We get them mainly from our mother and the messy birth process. And then over the next 3 years, we build up microbes. We're surrounded by them. They're everywhere, okay? And most of them don't live inside us. They don't like living in the dark of our gut. And most of them live in the lower part of your intestine, the colon. Most of our gut microbes, and there are 100 trillion of them, so as many as we have cells in our body, most 99% live in the lower part of our intestine, the colon. And there's no oxygen down there. It's very dark. They're waiting for food, and we acquire them in life. And by the age of 4, generally, we've more or less got our fingerprint of most of our gut microbes that we need, and they stay with us throughout life, changing a little bit with diseases and with diet and viruses and things like this. And the important thing is that when we ingest food, we will take some microbes in there, and when we breathe and things with a small amount, but it's tiny compared to the huge volume inside us. If you put them all together, they weigh up to about 1.5 or 2 kilograms, which is about the same as a human brain. So it's a large volume, like an organ in our body. So the best way of thinking of it is like you've discovered a new type of liver. And they're changing the food we eat into chemicals, and those chemicals are then having their effects all over our body. So that's a new way of thinking about our gut and our gut microbes. So they are really living. It makes our intestine much more than just a tube. We always think of ourselves as, food goes in one end, it gets burnt like in a furnace, and then it comes out the other. And this is where all these misconceptions about calories in, calories out, burning the fat, burning the calories, all this sort of stuff comes in. It's missing 90% of all the key bits of what we're talking about, is how that food gets converted into other chemicals, which are then crucial for our performance and health. So really important to understand that.
Can we test our current microbiome level? And then do we have a benchmark against which we can measure that and say, okay, we need to improve at 10%? Or is there a guideline, like a recommended daily allowance like there is for protein or vitamin C for ingesting good bacteria?
Okay, there's two questions there. We don't ingesting good bacteria. You're talking then about probiotics. Okay, so probiotics are live microbes found in food that we think are likely to have a health benefit. There are other microbes surrounding us all over the place. Every time we touch anything, from the microphone here to our cup or our dog, or that are covered in microbes. So we're surrounded by microbes all the time. The resident ones inside us, to decide whether they're healthy, there isn't a common standard as yet. I'm a co-founder of the company Zoe, which now has the biggest collection of poo samples that have been fully sequenced in the world.
Smelly
right?
business.
So, yeah, we're the big shit company. That's right. But it's a dream. So we have over 100,000 of these samples linked to health and linked to diet that no one else has of this depth. And we've got a new score, which we can tell healthy and non-healthy by the fraction of good bugs to bad bugs. So that's the way to think about this thing, is what are these beneficial microbes compared to the ones that indicate bad health. And we think we're getting towards having a universal score that people can attain to, because now we're starting to test people every 6 months and seeing if they can improve their scores in ways that are going to be healthy. So we're just at the beginning of this journey. In a couple of years, we'll have 1 million people, and it'll be much clearer across all countries and age groups, etc. So we're moving towards this concept of what's a good-looking gut look like. And I think once we've got that, it's a bit like sorting out what your blood pressure should be. We knew that blood pressure was high and low, but no one knew what they were trying to get to. Now, I think we see a future where every 6 months you'll have a stool test using genetics. You work out where you are, where you're going to, what you need to do to improve your gut health, because gut health is crucial. I can tell much more about your health, your risk of disease, from looking at your gut microbes than I can from your DNA. And this is coming from me as an ex-geneticist. So I think it's really important people realize the potential of the gut microbes to give this snapshot of how the whole body's doing, because in a way it's mirroring both what you put in it, but also it's mirroring the sort of signals it's getting from the body, like stress or inflammation or immune problems. That means it's not as healthy as it should be. So it's really, really fascinating how that affects the chemicals these produce, and it's reacting to the body as well.
And there's so little awareness around this. Like if we were to sit down now and go through, we won't, because it'll be the most boring podcast ever. But if we were to go through foods and try and separate them in, are these good for my gut microbiome, or are these bad for my gut microbiome? I'm sure I'd guess a few of them that are, I can't imagine energy drinks like Prime are particularly good for your gut microbiome. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, well, it's actually not as hard as you think. Anything that's ultra processed, which means has a list of ingredients that you wouldn't find in your kitchen, and it's not made from real food. So these are what I call edible food-like substances, whether they've got fake labels in it, like high in protein or low in calories or low in fat. They're all bad for your gut microbes, just like they're bad for your health. So generally, there's a pretty good relationship with what's good for your health, good for your microbes, and good for the planet, and the other ones that are bad. So, 60% of what we eat is ultra processed food anyway. So you can say that is bad for your gut microbes, because not only does it have lots of chemicals that interact with your microbes, sweeteners, artificial preservatives, emulsifiers, glues, these kind of stuff, but also they lack real food for the microbes to eat. So they just don't get there. Your microbes starve if you're on a diet of burgers and prime.
So I'm trying to think about this new lens of trying to view my diet through a lens of quality instead of quantity, because quantity has been the lens society has asked us to view diet through for so long. Calories in versus calories out. And I was trying to trace the origin of this, kind of the idea of the energy gap, the difference between your caloric intake and expenditure being ultimately the determinant of your body weight. But how do we start to reprogram our thinking? How important is, like, I suppose if you were trying to arrange a hierarchy here, would you put quality ahead of quantity? And if so, how important is the quantity of food we eat now, if we're looking at it from an obesity angle?
Well, if you sort out quality first, and everybody, say for example, we live in a utopia where, UK and Ireland, everyone's eating. We've gone down from 60% ultra processed foods to maybe 5%. Okay, just rare treats. You'd find that everyone would be eating 25% less anyway, because ultra processed foods increase your appetite and make you overeat. So already we'd be reducing everything by 25%. And if we told people then try and eat, as I do, eat 30 plants a week, get diversity of plants on your plate, eat less meat, this kind of stuff, you can tell people to eat as much as they like. And it's very hard for most people to get obese, because they'd get full. They'd get those normal signals back of what nature gave us, when we naturally feel full. So we've seen this, and in the Zoe program, and a recent randomized trial which was just done, we got 300 people. We gave them the sort of typical government guidelines to one group, saying reduce your calories, don't have high calorie foods, have plenty of fruits and vegetables, have low fat products, all the stuff that we're being brainwashed to do. And that group continued that for a year, and then another group did the Zoe program, where they said, we don't talk about calories. You can eat as much as you like, but we want you to eat these quality foods, whole foods, high in fiber, lots of plants, don't worry about fats, etc. After a year, there was clear differences in weight between the two groups. So the Zoe group had lost weight, had more energy, felt better, their blood workup looked much better, and the other group initially lost weight, but then had gone back up again, which is the typical way. So that, and there have been other studies similar to that, comparing a calorie approach versus a quality approach. So the quality approach always wins, because calories is a totally misleading way of looking at food. And I think this is, you rightly pointed out, this is the number one problem we have at the moment, this mindset that it's all about the energy, and you can't even measure it correctly, even if you tried to. That's the other problem. It's so inaccurate and so difficult to actually work out how much calories you're putting in and out, and your body will react to compensate when it feels it's being deprived of of food, which if you use whole food and you fill it up and you have lots of fiber, you don't get those same hunger signals. So I think, pragmatically, we just need to make this massive shift away from what the food manufacturers want us to believe in, which is all about calories and energy and percentage fat and all these and low sugar, and sell us more and more products that make us hungrier and hungrier and sicker, to going back to everyone understanding what quality food is all about.
So in that experiment, just to help me understand that, is there an experiment, or did that one you referenced there, did that deal with two groups who had the exact same amount of calories in each day? Say the groups were taking 2,000 calories in per day, and you looked at one group who had a high nutrition density group and one who had a nutritionally void, like your typical processed food diet. And after a period of time, there's an effect on body weight levels, like they differ in body weight levels after a period of time. Did I understand that correct?
Not entirely, no. There have been a number of trials in this area. The one I was referring to is the Zoe trial, which is being presented shortly, hasn't been fully published, so I can't go into the detail other than say that it's an approach. It's like saying one lot, you divide people randomly into two groups. Okay, so it's called randomized trial, and one group are given standardized advice, which is reduce your calories, reduce your fat, reduce your sugar, and eat more vegetables, which is what nearly every government tells people to do. Okay, and they have a phone call every week to say, are you doing it? Great, carry on. The other group get a personalized nutrition program, which is the Zoe program, which is available in the US and the UK, and essentially says, we test all this stuff at the beginning about your blood sugar, your blood fat, and your microbiome, and then we give you suggested foods to eat that are high in fiber, high in quality. We ask you to reduce ultra-processed foods, and you can have as much as you like to eat. We don't restrict amounts, and that's the difference. So it's a pragmatic study. It's not a fake study where you have to give portions and everything. So and I'm just giving that as an example of the sort of calorie approach versus the free approach. I mean, there are other studies looking at low-fat diets versus high-fat diets, and generally, whenever there's high fiber, high-quality diets, they make people less hungry. So it's a sort of irrelevance, really, of the calorie content. If you give people real whole foods that make them feel fuller, and they eat slower, and they have more energy, and they feel better. I think that's the general rule coming out of these studies, and they've done comparisons with burgers made, in an ultra-processed way or made at home, and the home burger, you'll end eating less of it and slower, and you'll feel better, and the other one you eat faster and quicker. So I think we're moving into this realm that the old paradigms of calories, fats, proteins, sugars is pretty irrelevant compared to how the food is put together and made and its effect on your body.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. As we pedal closer to the end of another year, I can't help but reflect on the highs and lows that come along with it. Whether it's the excitement of the holiday season or navigating the occasional winter blues, it can be a bit of a roller coaster. I've been thinking about how this time of year can be a little bit overwhelming, dealing with the stress and changes that accompany it all. Whether you've ever dipped your toes into therapy or not, let's chat about the bigger picture, benefits, and a language we can all relate to. Think of it as a toolkit for life, a bit of space where you can learn the ropes of positive coping skills, some time for self-reflection, and even somewhere where you can learn how to set those critical boundaries in your life. If you're contemplating the therapy journey, why not give BetterHelp a spin? This is therapy that's entirely online, crafted for ultimate convenience, flexibility, and tailored to your schedule. Just a quick questionnaire to match you with a licensed therapist, and the freedom to switch things up at no extra cost anytime. It's therapy on your terms, and I've got to say, the convenience is a total game changer. So find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/roadman today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP, betterhelp.com/roadman. The details are in the description below.
But sometimes I wonder, do we put too much emphasis on sustainability? Like a lot of these diets are prefaced for like, oh, I could never do that forever. But with a lot of our behaviors and habits, you don't have to do them forever. Like there is a obesity epidemic, and I even look at cyclists and triathletes who are hugely active, and a lot of them are carrying extra weight. And I've actually probably best to explain this by way of an example. I have a friend who's saving for a mortgage at the moment. So he's saving like 90% of his disposable income. If you went to a financial planner, he would say, well, saving 90% of your disposable income, that's not sustainable. But it doesn't need to be sustainable. He's only saving it until he gets that threshold of a deposit saved, and then he'll move back to a pattern of behavior that's sustainable. So I often wonder that with diet, although calorie counting and using MyFitnessPal maybe isn't sustainable long term. A lot of studies I've seen, people rebound to that default weight. Do you think there's an argument for using tools like that in the short term to kickstart yourself and then move to a more sustainable behavior?
I think it depends what time frame you're talking about. I don't think doing a diet every 2 years and rebounding is good for you. Generally, people there have been studies of this. It's called cycling, interestingly, where you go through these cycles of so starving yourself, and then your hunger levels just go up and up and up, and you actually go back and sometimes overshoot where you were. Metabolically, that's not very healthy. We studied twins who did that, identical twins, one of them doing diets and the other one not. And after 10 years, the one who hadn't done any of those diets was actually lighter and healthier than the other one. So, but if people are very obese, sometimes kick-starting, a diet, maybe with some intermittent fasting or doing something for a few weeks, might be appropriate. But I think the more I've studied this, I'd rather get people into patterns that are going to last years and decades than keep going through cycles of success and failure. Because very often, psychologically, the reason a lot of diets fail is people see it getting harder and harder and harder as your body's ramping up the signals for hunger, and your metabolism is slowing down and down as you're eating less calories. It just becomes impossible. And so people fail, and then they said, oh, I'm a failure, I can't do this, and they lose confidence, and then everything goes out the window. It's very hard to think rationally about failure in that way. So that's why, I think these, the reason most people fail on calorie controlled diets is exactly that our bodies are designed to beat them. So the only way to do this is slowly and by changing your hunger signals over time, by giving your body the right food it needs, because we're all very different. And some people might need fat, some people need carbs, some people need even more fiber than others, some people might need probiotics. All of these things really to keep your brain from telling you need more food. And I think that's it. And your friends who cycle a lot, must by now realize that exercise itself is not sufficient to lose weight for most people.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because it's kind of
not professional cycling, but I'm talking about social exercise.
Yeah, because there's an old adage, and I was going to ask about this in cycling and endurance sports, that you can't out-train a bad diet. And I've heard you saying that exercise doesn't help with weight loss. Help me unpack that one a little bit.
Yeah, so what I mean is that when you look at randomized trials of overweight people who've been allocated to exercise or doing nothing, on average, after a couple of years, there's no difference between the groups in terms of the weight loss in the group that tried to do it through exercise or not. So it means that some people might benefit, but as many people actually makes it worse as those that benefit. And so that's what these trials do. They just give you the average. So the average is zero benefit purely from exercise if you don't change your diet. And the reason is the same as calorie restriction. The reason your mum told you to go for a walk before your lunch is to give yourself a bit of an appetite, to eat more, right? And so evolution has told us that the more exercise we're doing, the more our appetite signals go up, so that we replenish and make sure we're not losing vital, body fat and muscle. So that's why exercise itself, in most people, there are variations, and some people you come up to me and say, it worked for me, but I also know many people that it actually made them fatter. And that's separate to studies that show that if you are on a diet and you've managed to lose weight, exercise can help you keep it off. But initiating it, statistically, your chances are it's not good, but it's going to help you, and it's every chance is going to make you fatter rather than.
But let me push back on that one for a second. I was at a recent college reunion, and there's a marked difference in the appearance of people that exercise versus don't. And I was trying to understand that in terms of the argument I've heard you make so well on a number of podcasts. An expression you used a minute ago, reductionist argument. I wonder, is this a reductionist argument? Because when you look at that study alone, sure, maybe someone that exercises, that alone doesn't lead to weight loss. But what exercising does do is it creates an ecosystem of habit stacking. If I'm the sort of person that gets up in the morning and puts on my running shoes and heads out the door for a 10K run or a 4-hour bike ride, I'm unlikely to be the person that also comes home and has, 6 beers watching the football game that evening. So you're creating this, all-encompassing healthy ecosystem around your lifestyle by exercising.
Well, you've pointed out exactly an association between people who exercise and people who have good diets. Okay, so they are linked. But to separate them, if you said what's the effect of one, that's why they do these randomized controlled trials. And I'm not talking about one. I think there are, perhaps as many as a dozen of these studies done in different countries, showing that the reason you do a trial is to separate all those other factors. So you've got people who are sporty, non-sporty, but generally these trials are done on people who don't do a lot of sport, right? And you take people who don't do a lot of sport and you say, okay, randomize one group to sport, the other to not, and you have another group that's maybe improving their diet. That's how they do those studies. You're absolutely right. People who are very good at getting up every day and doing sport are more likely to look after their health. Therefore, you will see your friends are much more likely to be healthier and thinner because they're exercising. But if you try to separate cause and consequence, and you try to teach someone who isn't particularly sporty to get up there and do sport to lose weight, they're not likely to succeed. Now, I'm all for sport. I exercise. It's fantastic for your body, for your health, your mind. So people get the wrong. I'm not an anti-sports person. I'm just saying that the many things that exercise is good for, actually weight loss is not one of them. It's an association that people get exactly as you've explained. People are more concerned with their health, more concerned with their body, more in tune with it. Therefore, they're less likely to eat and drink crap.
And even for me, it's the willpower side. It's like that willpower is a muscle that atrophies if I don't use it. When I get up in the morning and I put on my kit and I head out the door, I'm exercising that muscle and I can make better choices throughout the rest of my life, whether that's I'm more resilient to conflict, making better food choices, or someone's like, do you want to go for those extra few pints of beer? I'm more likely to make good choices around all that when I'm exercising. Obviously, this is entirely anecdotal, but that's been my experience with it.
Yeah, no, I think, well, everyone has a different level, and we can't experience someone else's hunger either. So I think there's, we mustn't sort of do the shaming just say because you or I might find it fairly easy not to massively overeat and get obese. Some people might be having incredible hunger signals that we can't fathom or live in. So I think we have to start separating these ideas, and it's not like, perhaps you had, we think, you may have had genes that said you're going to really enjoy running and cycling, and you get a bigger endorphin effect from that than some other people who are more naturally couch potatoes. And in the past, we thought it was all to do to metabolism and things, but increasingly, most of the genes, for example, in obesity are all in the brain. And it's these perceptions and, how you think of food and how you think of those reward systems and how strong those signals are. Just like, some people get addicted to drugs and alcohol and everything else. We're all very different in our responses. And I think we've got to start thinking things more logically in terms of chemicals and the brain, because there is no difference really between our bodies and our brain and our gut microbes, our signals. They work crucially on our mental health as well. So separate association from causation, and I think we have to trust both. They're telling us different things. They're saying if you can get to exercise and you like exercise and you can maintain exercise, the chances are you might then be able to deal with food better. But for those first sort of couple of years, as a way of losing weight, forget it.
Excuse the short interruption, but I wanted to find a way to bring our little community together, to problem solve, to share training advice, and to support each other in what can sometimes be a lonely road as we all chase health, happiness, and longevity through cycling. To facilitate this, I've set up a Discord channel. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below. It doesn't cost anything to join. It's totally free. Plus, I'm also picking out random winners for spot prizes inside the Discord channel. If you'd like to join it, click on the link down below. We're also, we're so tribal. We turn everything into a tribe, whether it's getting a vaccine or not getting a vaccine. And diet is no different. We silo into these tribes. I had Mark Sisson on the podcast. I'm not sure if you've heard any Mark stuff, but Mark is a staunch advocate for a keto diet. Can you get something as extreme as a keto diet to work? Because I've tried it and I found it practically impossible to do. I was pricking myself to check my blood sugar levels, and it was a total impossibility to be an endurance athlete and a keto diet proponent for me. Was I missing something there?
No, but I mean, it's a bit like, why would anyone want to be a religious fundamentalist? It's like, and food is the new religion as far as I see it. So, you can get fundamentalists on your podcast. That's fine, and they're showing this extreme view, which to my mind is just another way of reductionism, isn't it? There's only one way to follow the God, and this is the God of keto. And someone else will say, no, it's the ultra vegan, or it's the whatever. So I think we have to realize, firstly, that I'm not in favor of any extreme views. We are omnivores, and humans designed to eat a whole variety of different foods, and we need to embrace that diversity. And if you understand your gut microbes, you would never say keto diet's good, because you're depriving a keto diet, which most people, just like you, find pretty impossible to sustain more than 70% of their diet as fats. I've done it for about 2 days. It's really, really tough. But you're depriving. You can't have that many plants if you're on a keto diet. So and then you don't get the diversity. Therefore, your gut microbes die off. You only get the ones that like eating fat. They produce inflammation. Long term, it's going to do you harm. You get more problems. There are some people, rare, some people do feel much better on a keto diet, and there are some rare conditions that can be cured by keto diets, like childhood epilepsy for some reason. But in general, it's an extreme view that moves against everything I believe in scientifically, which is we should be eating a huge diversity of plants in order to give ourselves the biggest diversity of gut microbes, and therefore the biggest arsenal of chemicals we have to keep our body functioning really well. And I think once you start narrowing that down, you're narrowing down what sources, what microbes will grow in you, and therefore what chemicals they produce, and how your body can then use those and those vitamins and everything else.
I'm fascinated with this new march towards AI at the moment, and I'd love to understand how you think it could be applied into the health sphere. Can understanding our genetic makeup and our gut microbiome, do you think this could move to a more personalized approach to health?
Absolutely, yes. No, AI is really key in the future of health to unravel this complexity. So, I've complained about reductionism. Humans are really complicated. We have thousands of chemicals in our body. We've got 30,000 genes. We've got 500,000 microbial genes, all of these producing proteins. And trying to understand what the best mix is, we need machine learning, we need AI. And through the company Zoe, we're already using machine learning, which is a primitive version of AI anyway, to try and unravel this. And I think giving people algorithms is sort of what we're doing already. We test your blood sugar response, your blood fat response, and your gut microbiome, and we find that nobody's equal. Everyone has a completely unique set of responses to food, just probably like they have a unique response to exercise. And once you get this, and you can start to give people their personal algorithms about how they're likely to respond to some event like diets or exercise, then that's where we're moving into this era of personalization. And it is, it's already here, really. We have it in fairly crude methods at the moment, but each year we're going on, our data set expanding, our algorithms are getting better. So I think to unravel the complexity of humans, and what we're only really understanding recently is this huge individuality we have, because we've always assumed we're like robots. We're all the same. You've got to look at ultra runners, and the fact that they all come up with different diets, and they're all the vegan runners and the keto runners and the pasta runners and the eat little and often runners and the
it's so bizarre that we treat everyone the same. Like, you can't say the overweight, obese Twitch streamer is the same as Usain Bolt. They're hardly the same species.
No, exactly. And this is because, the thing that's really most different about humans is actually their gut microbiome. You and I share 99.5% of our DNA. I can guarantee we're at least fifth cousins, okay? So hi, cousin. Probably fourth.
It's great to have family on the podcast.
Because I've got some Irish genes, so we're probably third or fourth cousins. But we're really distant microbial relatives. Okay, so we're hardly going to share any of our gut microbes, and you'll have some unique microbes that no one else, in Ireland would have. Be completely unique to you, and that's going to produce unique chemicals in response to some situation. So I think we have to embrace this individuality in all this advice, particularly lifestyle advice, and we find amazing things now that we didn't realize about exercise. Some people's blood glucose, most people's blood glucose drops on exercise. Okay, so I found that mine often goes up. If I go for a cycle on an empty stomach, suddenly I've got a big peak in my blood sugar, but most people don't. And then you've got some people who perform better after a meal exercise, some people on an empty stomach. Everybody seems to be different. There's difference between men and women, different at different ages. And I think we've got to start embracing this rather than trying to all squash everybody into one category, and then some expert writes a book on it and says everyone's got to, this is the keto way, everyone's got to do this. No, most people aren't going to be perfect for that very narrow view on life. We've got to embrace this complexity. We've got to get everyone to be self-experimenting. Athletes
But you
do it
know
all
what?
the time, but most people don't.
We're in an era now where we've data, like we've so much data, and you're trained to understand that data. But the problem that a layperson has, a company sent me out a continuous glucose monitor to use for cycling. And like you observed there, I'll go for cycling fasted, and all of a sudden my blood sugar spikes. I'll go for it with a light meal, and it won't have the same spike. But I don't know how to interpret that data. I don't know what to do with that data. I don't know how to make it actionable to make myself healthier, faster, live longer with that data. So it seems like we need to move from this era of having just data out the wazoo at the moment, where I have my sleep data, my step data, my stress data, blood sugar data. I don't know what to do with it. What am I doing with all this data? How can I make better decisions with all this data?
Well, what we need is to get people like you, everybody, into a big community that shares the data, and so we can make sense of it. You can't really do a lot of this on your own unless someone else has worked out in 100,000 people whether it's good to have that sugar spike as you're exercising or bad. And to do that, you can't do it on your own. You need lots of other people to be collecting the same data and work it out. And that's what we're trying to do in the approaches we've got at Zoe. Is everybody's doing these tests with the glucose monitors and looking at fat responses and microbiome, getting results back themselves, but they're also putting it into this massive database so that every few months we've got some new data on sugar spikes or sugar dips, things that we didn't know before. So we now know that sugar dips, for example, 3 hours after a meal, are associated with being tired, losing your mood, and overeating in the rest of the day. So we know a sugar spike isn't necessarily as bad, but a sugar dip really is. And these are things you could only get once you've got several thousand people doing those same studies. So I think it's about all these groups of people going from that very individualistic idea of I'm going to sort myself out to perhaps combining in groups to understand this.
And if I want to get plugged in, or if any of the listeners want to get plugged into this Zoe community and get our stool samples analyzed, is that open to the public? Is it possible to do that?
Yeah, so you need an address or a place to stay in the US or the UK, and everyone can sign up. And it's this program, and so all you got to do is just go to zoe.com, and you can see it. And also, we have a lot of discussions of this. There's a Zoe podcast as well, purely on nutrition and science.
Which is brilliant. It's one of my go-to podcasts. So they say you've 3 podcasts in your rotation. So Zoe is one of my 3 in the rotation.
Well, that's great. Yeah, and that's all free, and it's easy to access for everybody. But if you are interested in your own personal health, you want to understand how you respond to food, then do the Zoe program. You'll see how you respond to fats. It may have explained to you why keto diet wasn't for you, because a spike in your fat levels, you couldn't get rid of it quickly. It caused inflammation, and really not good for you, whereas other people might be able to cope with it rather well. And by deciding that, it changes what you might have for breakfast, for lunch. It certainly changed a lot of things in my diet. And again, you're able to track your gut health over time as well. And you get suggestions about how you should be eating through recipes, etc. So with a digital coach. So I think the idea is it's going back to sustainability, it's trying to give you the tools so that you can think about food in a different way than the conventional way, and make that last for decades. That you never go back to that old way of thinking about food as purely as calories or purely as fats or macros, and we're trying to get people to not worry too much about protein, because it's much more about the quality and are your microbes getting the fiber.
I think it's clear we need to start looking at diet not through that lens of quantity, but through a lens of quality. And you're one of the most eloquent and leading voices in pushing that new important agenda. So thank you very much for that. And thanks for your time today to chat.
Been my pleasure.
If you enjoyed this chat, you're going to absolutely love the conversation I had with intermittent fasting expert Cynthia Thurlow. Her advice specifically around breakfast changed how I eat forever. You can click it just here.